All right, let's break down everything step by step and use simple words to make it easy for you to understand. Who was Lord Ripon? Full name, George Frederick Samuel Robinson, 1st Marquess of Ripon. Born in 1827. Career start. In 1849, he started working in a government office called the Brussels Legation, like a mini embassy. House of Commons. In 1852, he became a member of the British Parliament, representing the Liberal Party, a political party. India-related roles. Under Secretary for India in 1859 and again from 1861 to 1863, an important government role to manage Indian affairs. Secretary of State for India from 1866 to 1868, the highest official responsible for India in Britain. His religious change. Converted to Catholicism. In 1874, he switched his religion from Protestantism to Roman Catholicism. Key political contributions. Gladstone's cabinet, 1868 to 1874. During this time, he helped pass important laws, including Irish Church Act, changed rules related to churches in Ireland. Education Act, focused on improving education. Ballot Act, introduced secret voting so people could vote without being influenced by others. Appointment as Viceroy of India, 1880. Viceroy of India. In 1880, Ripon became the Viceroy of India, the head of British India. He was chosen by William Gladstone, who was the leader of the British Liberal Party at the time. Gladstone's vision for India. Gladstone, the leader of the Liberal Party, believed 1. Britain should be in India only if it helped Indian people. 2. Indians must see and understand that Britain's presence is helpful. Ripon's beliefs and values. Democracy. Ripon believed in democracy, meaning that all people should have a say in the government. 2 main beliefs. 1. Everyone should help run their country. No matter their background, all people should have a role in governing. 2. Self-government is the best. The best form of government is when people can govern themselves. His promise? Ripon told the people of India, "Judge me by my actions, not my words." This means he wanted people to see what he did, not just what he said. Ripon's approach to India, different from others. Ripon was very different from the viceroys before him. He had a strong sense of duty and mission to help India. Humanitarian. Ripon cared deeply about human rights and well-being. He wanted to make changes in India that would benefit the people. Examples of what Ripon did. 1. Self-government. Ripon supported giving Indians more control in their local governments. This idea was called local self-government. It meant Indians could participate in making decisions in their cities and towns. Example, local boards were set up in cities, and Indian citizens could vote for their leaders in those boards. 2. Repeal of the Vernacular Press Act. This was a law that restricted Indian language newspapers from criticizing the British government. Ripon helped cancel this law so people could speak more freely. Example, Indian newspapers could now openly express their opinions about the government without fear of being shut down. 3. Ilbert Bill, 1883. This bill aimed to give Indian judges more power, allowing them to try British citizens in court. However, the bill faced strong opposition from British people in India, and it was modified. Example, Indian judges gained some power, but not as much as originally intended due to protests from the British in India. Why is Ripon important? Ripon is remembered as a true liberal who genuinely wanted to improve the lives of Indian people. He worked towards more fairness and democracy in India, even though some of his reforms were not fully successful. Let's break this down in a very simple way, step by step. What was the situation in India when Lord Ripon came? India was in turmoil. This means there was a lot of unrest and tension in India, not just in politics, but also in society and religion. People were unhappy and frustrated. Political unrest. People were upset with the way the British were ruling India. Social unrest. There were issues among different groups of people in society. Religious unrest. Conflicts between different religious communities were making things even harder. Why were people unhappy? The previous Viceroy of India, Lord Lytton, had made some very unpopular decisions, rules and laws that caused a lot of discontent, unhappiness among the people. His actions had pushed India closer to the edge of a possible revolution, where people rise up and fight against the government. What did Lord Ripon do? Healing India's wounds. When Lord Ripon came to India, he tried to fix the problems and calm people down. He wanted to repair the damage caused by Lytton's unpopular measures. Undoing Lytton's acts. Ripon reversed, cancelled, or changed many of the decisions made by Lytton that had caused people to be angry. Ripon's positive steps. Local self-government. This was one of Ripon's most important contributions. He introduced the idea of local self-government, which means allowing Indians to have some control over their own local affairs. Example. He set up local boards, groups, where Indian citizens could elect their own leaders and make decisions about things like roads, schools, and hospitals in their towns and cities. Foundation of representative institutions. Representative institutions. Ripon's idea of local self-government was important because it laid the foundation, or built the base, for more democratic institutions in the future. Example. The ability for Indian people to elect their own representatives, leaders, in local governments started with Ripon's reforms. This was a small but important step toward greater political participation for Indians. In simple terms, India was in trouble when Ripon came, with people being angry because of the decisions made by the previous viceroy, Lord Lytton. Ripon helped calm things down by reversing, changing many of Lytton's bad decisions. Ripon gave Indians a chance to manage their own towns and cities through local self-government. This was an important step toward giving Indians more control over their own country. Ripon is remembered as a leader who wanted to help and improve India, while Lytton had caused anger and unrest. Does this help make it clearer? Let's break this down in simple and easy terms, step by step. 1. Repeal of the Vernacular Press Act, 1882. What was the Vernacular Press Act, 1878? This was a law created by Lord Lytton in 1878. It was unfair because it restricted newspapers written in Indian languages, vernacular languages, from speaking freely or criticizing the British government. The law was designed to control what people said, especially if they spoke out against British rule. What did Lord Ripon do in 1882? Repealed the law. This means he canceled or removed the Vernacular Press Act. Now, Indian language newspapers had the same freedom as English newspapers to write about anything, even the government. Why was this important? This decision helped make Indian people less angry and earned their trust. People felt like they could now express their thoughts and opinions freely. Did everything change? Not completely. The government kept another law called the Sea Customs Act, 1878, which allowed the post office to search and take away any writings that the British felt were seditious, meaning writings that might encourage people to revolt or rebel. Number 2. The First Factory Act, 1881. What is a Factory Act? This law was designed to protect workers in factories. Many people worked in poor and unsafe conditions, especially children. What did the First Factory Act do? The law applied to factories that had 100 or more workers. It included several important rules to protect workers, especially children. 1. No children under 7 years old could work in factories. 2. Limited working hours. Children under 12 could only work for a limited number of hours, so they wouldn't get too tired or sick. 3. Dangerous machines must be fenced. Factories had to make sure their machinery was safe and workers wouldn't get hurt. How was this enforced? The government appointed inspectors to visit factories and make sure the rules were being followed. Why was this important? Although the law only applied to larger factories and had some limits, it was a big step forward for protecting Indian workers and improving their working conditions. This law opened a new phase in India's industrial history, meaning it was the beginning of better treatment for factory workers. Simple summary. 1. Repeal of the Vernacular Press Act, 1882. Lord Ripon removed the unfair law that stopped Indian language newspapers from speaking freely. Now, they had the same rights as English newspapers to express their opinions, which made the public happier. 2. First Factory Act, 1881. This law helped protect factory workers, especially children. It stopped very young children from working and made factories safer by limiting working hours and making sure machines were not dangerous. Does this make things clearer? Feel free to ask more questions. Let's explain this in a very simple way, step by step, so you can easily understand. What is financial decentralization? Decentralization means spreading power or control from one central point to other smaller parts. Financial decentralization means spreading the control of money and income, revenue, between the central government, top level, and the provincial governments, smaller regions, states. Why was this needed? Before, the central government, British government, controlled most of the money and finances in India. The smaller regions, called provinces, had little control over money matters. Lord Ripon wanted to give provinces more responsibility for their own money and spending. This would help them manage their own areas better. What did Lord Ripon do in 1882? Ripon followed a plan that Lord Mayo had started earlier, to give provinces more financial responsibility. He made the system bigger and gave provinces even more control. He divided the sources of money, revenue, into 3 different groups. 1. Imperial heads for the central government. 2. Provincial heads for the provincial governments. 3. Divided heads, shared between central and provincial governments. 1. Imperial heads, central government's money. These are the sources of money that only the central government, British government, could use. Example, customs, taxes on goods brought into India, post and telegraphs, sending mail and messages, railways, opium, salt, land revenue, tax on land, and military expenses. Who got this money? Only the central government took this money to cover its expenses. 2. Provincial heads, provinces' money. This money was for the provincial governments, smaller regions. Example, money earned from jails, medical services, hospitals, roads, printing, and general administration. Who got this money? The provincial governments kept all of this money to spend on local needs in their regions. Problem. Sometimes the provinces didn't make enough money from these things to cover all their expenses. So, the central government helped by giving them extra money, a percentage from the land revenue. 3. Divided heads, shared money. These are the sources of money that were shared equally between the central government and provincial governments. Example, excise, tax on alcohol and tobacco, stamps, forests, and registration, like registering land or marriage. Who got this money? Both the central and provincial governments got half the money from these sources and also shared the expenses. What is the quinquennial settlement? The term quinquennial means every 5 years. So, under this system, the financial arrangement between the central and provincial governments was reviewed and adjusted every 5 years. This helped ensure that provinces had enough money to manage their needs properly. Why was Ripon's system important? 1. More control for provinces. Provinces now had more responsibility and could manage their own money and expenses better. Example, if a province needed to build roads, they could use their money from the provincial heads without asking the central government for permission. 2. Shared responsibility. Both the central and provincial governments now shared money and expenses, making them work together more effectively. Example, the money from forests or stamps was shared, so both governments had an interest in making sure these things were managed well. 3. Long-lasting system. Ripon's system of divided heads continued to be used until it was changed in 1919. It worked well for many years. Simple summary. Before, the central government controlled most of the money in India. Lord Ripon changed that in 1882 by giving provinces more control over their own finances. He divided money sources into imperial heads, central government, provincial heads, provinces, and divided heads, shared. This helped provinces manage their own expenses better and made the central and provincial governments work together more closely. Does this explanation help? Feel free to ask more questions if anything is unclear.
What is local self-government? Local self-government is when people in a village, town, or city get to run their own affairs. Instead of waiting for someone in the central government, far away in a big city like Delhi, to make decisions about local issues, people who live in that place can make decisions themselves. Example: imagine you live in a village and the roads are damaged. In a local self-government, the people in the village would come together, choose who will be in charge, a group called a local board, and that group would decide how to fix the roads. They don't have to wait for the central government to decide. Why did Lord Ripon want this? Lord Ripon believed that people should learn how to govern themselves. He thought that when people in a village or town take responsibility for their area, they learn how to make better decisions and understand government. He didn't just want the government to make things run smoothly. He wanted local people to be involved so they could get educated about politics and how decisions are made. What did Lord Ripon do in 1882? In 1882, Lord Ripon introduced the idea of local self-government through something called a resolution. This was a plan to set up local boards in both villages and towns all across India. What is a local board? A local board is like a small group of people from a village, town, or city who come together to manage local things like fixing roads, providing clean water, organizing schools, making sure the streets are clean, providing medical help. Example of a local board: imagine you live in a town. The local board might have members like a school teacher, a farmer, a shop owner. These people meet and talk about what the town needs and how to fix problems. Instead of waiting for the faraway government to fix things, they handle it themselves. Where were local boards set up? Local boards were set up in both rural areas, villages, and urban areas, towns and cities and villages. The local board would cover the smallest area, like a subdivision, tahsil, or talaka. This is like a small group of villages that work together. In towns and cities, the local boards were called municipal committees or city bodies. Example: in a village, people would form a local board for several nearby villages, called a talaka or tahsil. In a town, the local board would be called a municipal committee, and it would handle things like cleaning the streets or organizing schools. What powers did the local boards have? The local boards were given specific duties, things they had to do. They had to take care of lighting the streets, cleaning roads, providing schools, supplying water, making sure hospitals and medical services are available. Example: if the streets in a town are dirty, the local board can make a plan to hire people to clean them regularly. They don't have to wait for someone from the faraway central government to tell them what to do. What was different about Ripon's plan? Non-official members. Most of the people on the local board should be non-official members, meaning they should be common people from the area, not government officials. Example: a local board in a village might have people like farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers, not just government workers. Elections. Ripon wanted the members of these local boards to be elected by the people. This means that the people in the village or town would vote to choose who should be on the local board. Example: if you live in a village, you could vote to choose a person like your school teacher to be on the local board to help manage the local school. Less government control. Ripon believed that the government should let the local boards make their own decisions and only check their work when necessary. The government shouldn't control everything the local boards do. Example: the local board in a town decides how to spend money on fixing roads. The government won't tell them exactly how to do it, but will check to make sure they are spending the money correctly. Elected chairman. The chairman of the local board, the person in charge, should be elected by the members of the local board, not appointed by the government. Example: if a local board has 10 members, they will choose, vote, among themselves who will be the chairman. How did this work in practice? After Ripon's plan in 1882, different provinces, regions, in India started passing laws to create these local boards. Example: in Madras, now called Chennai, a law was passed in 1884 to give the local boards the power to manage things like street lighting, cleaning roads, providing education, water supply, medical services. Similar laws were also passed in Punjab and Bengal. Summary of Lord Ripon's resolution on local self-government. In 1882, Ripon made a plan for local self-government. This allowed people in villages and towns to run their own local affairs. Local boards were created to manage things like schools, roads, water, and medical services. Ripon wanted common people, not government officials, to be on these boards, and he encouraged elections so people could choose who would manage their local issues. The government would check on the local boards but wouldn't interfere with everything they did. Why was this important? Ripon's plan helped teach people how to govern themselves. It gave people a chance to learn about democracy and decision-making, starting at the local level. This was a major step in giving Indians more control over their own affairs and preparing them for future participation in the larger political system. I hope this explanation makes it clear. Let me know if you'd like to know more about any specific part.
Let's go through the resolution on land revenue policy step by step and in the simplest way possible. What is land revenue? Land revenue is the tax that farmers or landowners pay to the government for using the land to grow crops or for other purposes. Example: imagine you own a piece of land where you grow crops. You would pay the government a certain amount of money every year as a tax. This is called land revenue. What was the Permanent Settlement of Bengal, 1793? In 1793, a British officer named Lord Cornwallis made a law called the Permanent Settlement of Bengal. This law changed how land revenue was collected in Bengal, a large region in India. The law turned zamindars, people who collected taxes from farmers, into landlords. This means that these zamindars now owned the land and could demand taxes from the ryots farmers as much as they wanted. Example: before 1793, zamindars were just like tax collectors for the government. But after this law, they became landowners and could demand a lot of money from the farmers. This often left the ryots farmers in a bad situation because they had to pay high taxes to the zamindars, who sometimes didn't care if the farmers could afford to pay. Why was this a problem? The Permanent Settlement of Bengal created a big issue because the ryots farmers were not protected. The zamindars, landlords, could demand high taxes, and the government had no control over how much the farmers had to pay. Example: imagine being a farmer and the landlord, zamindar, suddenly asks for more money, even though you didn't grow a lot of crops that year. This would put you in a tough spot, and you might struggle to survive. What did Lord Ripon want to change? Lord Ripon didn't like this system. He wanted to change the rules so that the ryots would be treated more fairly. He didn't want the permanent settlement, the rule that let zamindars act as landlords, to be applied all across India because it gave too much power to the zamindars and hurt the ryots. Example: Ripon was like a teacher who saw that some students were being bullied by the class monitor, so he wanted to protect the students and make sure they were treated fairly. Ripon's proposal for a better system. Ripon wanted to protect the farmers by giving them more security and stability. He thought that the farmers should, 1. Have permanent rights to their land so they wouldn't be kicked off by the zamindars. 2. Have guaranteed low taxes so the government couldn't raise the taxes suddenly except when prices of crops went up. Example: if a farmer grows crops on a piece of land, Ripon's idea was that the farmer should own the land instead of the zamindar, and the taxes they pay to the government should stay the same unless the crops were selling for more money in the market. What happened to Ripon's plan? Zamindars in Bengal didn't like Ripon's idea because it would take away their power over the farmers. Farmers, ryots, also didn't fully support the plan because they were afraid that the British officials, Anglo-Indian bureaucracy, might be even worse than the zamindars if they took control. Example: the zamindars wanted to keep their power, and the farmers were afraid of what would happen if the government controlled everything. This made it hard for Ripon to make his changes. Why didn't Ripon's plan work? Ripon's ideas didn't get approved by the Secretary of State in Britain. This was the person in charge of Indian affairs in the British government. So, even though Ripon tried to help the farmers, his proposals didn't become law, and the system stayed mostly the same. Summary: Lord Ripon didn't like the idea of turning tax collectors, zamindars, into landlords like in Bengal. He wanted a system where the farmers, ryots, had security and didn't have to pay high taxes unless prices went up. Ripon's plan faced opposition from both the zamindars and the farmers, and it wasn't approved by the British government. What can we learn from this? Ripon was trying to improve the lives of farmers by giving them more rights and protecting them from being exploited by zamindars. However, his plan didn't succeed because it faced opposition from powerful people, like the Zamindars, and because the British government didn't agree with his ideas. I hope this makes it easier to understand. Let me know if you have any questions or if you want more examples. Let's go through the educational reforms of 1882 step by step in the simplest way, as if I'm explaining to a young learner with no knowledge. I'll break everything down clearly and add examples to make it easy to understand. Background. What is education reform? Education reform means making changes in how education is given to make it better for students. In 1882, the British government in India wanted to improve education across the country. To do this, they created a group of experts called a commission, led by Sir William Hunter, to look at the current education system and suggest improvements. Example. Think of it like your school wanting to know if students are learning well and how they can teach better. So they ask a group of teachers and experts to give suggestions on how to improve learning for everyone. What was the purpose of the Hunter Commission? The Hunter Education Commission was asked to 1. Look closely at what had been done in education since 1854. 2. Suggest new ideas for improving education. Example. Imagine someone checking how much progress you've made in school since you started, and then telling your teachers how to help you learn more in the future. Main recommendations of the Hunter Commission. 1. Primary education, basic education for young children. The Commission said that the government was responsible for making sure primary education for young children grew and got better. They suggested that primary education should be taken care of by municipal boards and district boards, local government bodies, but the government should still keep an eye on them to make sure they do a good job. Example. Think of primary education like your first few years in school. The Commission wanted local groups to manage it, but the government would check in to make sure everything was running smoothly. 2. Secondary education. Education for older students. For secondary education for older students, they recommended 2 different paths. 1. Literary education, for students who wanted to go to university or study subjects like history, literature, and science. 2. Practical education, for students who wanted to learn skills for jobs, like in business or trade. Example, think of literary education like preparing to go to college to become a doctor, teacher, or lawyer. Practical education would be like learning to become an engineer, start a business, or do computer work. 3. Grants and aid system. The grants and aid system means that the government gives money to private schools to help them educate students. The Commission said this system should be used more to support secondary schools, schools for older students, and higher education, like universities. Example. Imagine the government helping private schools by giving them money so they can have better teachers, classrooms, and resources for students. 4. Female education. The Commission also pointed out that there were not enough schools for girls, especially outside big cities, called presidency towns. They wanted more focus on improving female education in rural areas. At that time, it was much harder for girls in villages to get a good education. The Commission wanted to change that by making sure girls could also go to school and learn. What did the Commission not focus on? The Commission didn't make any suggestions about university education because they were not asked to do so. Example. Think of it like being given homework on math, but not on science. They only focused on primary and secondary education, not universities. What happened after the recommendations? Most of the Commission's recommendations were accepted by the government. In the last part of the 19th century, there was a big growth in the number of schools in India. Many of these schools were started by private individuals or groups who wanted to help people get an education. Example. Imagine more and more people opening schools in different places, thanks to the Commission's recommendations. These schools helped educate many children and young adults. Summary of the Hunter Commission's educational reforms. 1. Primary education should be taken care of by local boards, but the government should keep an eye on it. 2. Secondary education should have two different paths, one for students going to university and another for students learning job skills. 3. The grants and aid system should help more schools by giving money to support education. 4. More focus should be placed on female education, especially in rural areas. Why was this important? These changes were important because they helped expand education to more people in India, especially in rural areas. The idea of giving people different types of education, literary or practical, made it easier for students to choose paths that suited their career goals. I hope this explanation helps you understand the educational reforms of 1882 better. Have any more questions or need more examples?
Let's break down the Ilbert Bill controversy, 1883 to 84, step by step in simple, easy-to-understand language, like explaining to a young learner with no prior knowledge. I'll explain everything clearly, with examples, and add more details to help you understand better. What was the Ilbert Bill? In 1883, a law called the Ilbert Bill was introduced by Sir C.P. Ilbert, who was part of the British government in India, specifically the Viceroy's Council. The goal of this bill was simple: remove racial discrimination in the courts. It aimed to allow Indian judges to try European British subjects, British people living in India, in criminal cases. Example: think of the bill like this. Right now, Indian judges can handle civil cases, like land disputes or business disagreements, even if British people are involved. But when it comes to criminal cases, serious crimes like robbery or murder, Indian judges are not allowed to try British people. The Ilbert Bill wanted to change that and allow Indian judges to treat British people the same way they treated Indians. Why was the Ilbert Bill important? Before this bill, there was a huge difference between how Indians and British people were treated under the law. Indian judges could not handle criminal cases involving British people. This bill was meant to make everyone equal in the eyes of the law. Example: imagine in your town, the local judges, Indian, could only try people from your town, Indians, for serious crimes. But if someone from another country, British, committed a crime, a special judge from that other country had to handle it. That doesn't seem fair, right? The Ilbert Bill wanted to stop that unfairness. Why did the Ilbert Bill face opposition? Many British people in India, especially planters, those who owned large tea and coffee plantations, were very upset about this bill. They didn't want Indian judges to have the power to put them on trial for crimes. They felt that Indian judges were not as good or as capable as British judges. Example: the British people were saying, should we let Indians, whom they look down upon, judge us? No way. We don't trust them. We are better than them. This was a very racist and discriminatory attitude. They also didn't want to lose their special privileges, benefits that others didn't get. For example, if a British person committed a crime like beating or even killing an Indian worker, they would be judged by a British judge who would often let them off with very light punishment. Example: let's say a British man beat an Indian worker. If an Indian judge handled the case, the British man might face real punishment. But under the old system, with a British judge, he would often get away with it. How did the British people respond to the bill? British people in India started a big protest against the Ilbert Bill. They raised money, 150,000 rupees, and formed a group called the Defense Association to protect their special privileges. They spread propaganda, false or exaggerated information, both in India and in London, trying to stop the bill from becoming law. They said things like, "We will never let Indians judge us. This is a humiliation for us." They even suggested that it was better for British rule to end in India than for them to be tried by Indian judges. Example: it's like if a group of people in your neighborhood said, "We don't want the local judge Indian to judge us because we think we're better than them, and it would be embarrassing if they punished us for our wrongdoings." Extreme reactions from the British community. Some British people in India went as far as to plan dangerous actions. Some wanted to overpower the guards at the government house, arrest the viceroy, the highest British official in India, and send him back to England. The tea planters in Assam even planned to kidnap the viceroy when he visited their area. Back in London, the British newspaper The Times attacked the policies of the viceroy, Lord Ripon. Even Queen Victoria didn't like the idea of this bill. Example: this reaction was similar to people getting so angry that they planned to kidnap a leader just because they didn't like a new law. It shows how extreme their resistance was. What happened in the end? The protests and opposition were so intense that Lord Ripon, the viceroy, backed down, a compromise was made, and the Ilbert Bill was changed in 1884. The new version said that if a European British person was on trial, they could ask for a jury of 12 people, and at least 7 of those people had to be British or American. Example. Imagine a new rule that if a British person had to go to court, they could choose to have a group of people, a jury, decide their case, but the majority of those people had to be British. This weakened the original idea of the Ilbert Bill. Why did the compromise weaken the Ilbert Bill? The original goal of the Ilbert Bill was to give Indian judges equal power to try British people. But the compromise allowed British people to still have special treatment by letting them have a jury that was mostly made up of other British people. This meant that the principle of equality was not fully achieved. Summary. The Ilbert Bill was introduced in 1883 to allow Indian judges to try British people in criminal cases, which had not been allowed before. Many British people in India were angry because they didn't want to be judged by Indians and felt it was humiliating. The British community protested strongly, raised money, and even planned violent actions to stop the bill. In the end, a compromise was reached in 1884, which still allowed British people to get special treatment by asking for a jury made up mostly of other British or American people. The Ilbert Bill controversy showed the racial tensions between the British and Indians and how difficult it was to achieve equality under British rule. I hope this explanation makes the Ilbert Bill controversy clear for you. Let me know if you need more examples or details. What does Ripon bowed before the storm of agitation mean? Ripon was the viceroy, head of British rule in India, who introduced the Ilbert Bill. There was a lot of anger and protest. This is what storm of agitation means from the British community in India. Because of this strong opposition, Ripon gave in, or bowed, and agreed to make changes to the Ilbert Bill. What was the compromise reached in 1884? A compromise is when two sides agree to meet in the middle. Instead of one side getting everything they want, they both get part of what they want. The original goal of the Ilbert Bill was to allow Indian judges to handle cases involving British people without any special rules. But the amended, changed, bill that was passed on January 26, 1884 still gave British people some special privileges. What was in the amended, changed bill? British people, called European British subjects, on trial had the right to ask for a jury to decide their case. A jury is a group of 12 people who decide if someone is guilty or innocent. In these cases, at least 7 out of the 12 jury members had to be Europeans or Americans. Example. Imagine if someone from Britain committed a crime in India. Under the new law, they could ask for a jury of 12 people, but most of these people, at least 7, had to be from Britain or America. This gave them a better chance of being judged by people of their own race. If this happened in rural areas, called Mufassal districts, where there weren't enough Europeans to form a jury, the case would be moved to another court as directed by the High Court. Example. If a British person committed a crime in a small village, Mufassal, but there weren't enough British or American people around to form a jury, the case would be sent to another court where a proper jury could be made. What does virtually surrendered the very principle mean? The principle behind the original Ilbert Bill was to create equality between Indian and British judges. It was supposed to remove racial bias in the courts. However, by allowing special treatment for British people, letting them have mostly British or American juries, the new law gave up that original goal of true equality. In simple words, the changes made to the bill went against the original idea of making Indian and British people equal in the eyes of the law. Conclusion. The compromise bill allowed Indian judges to try British people, but still gave special rights to British people by letting them ask for a jury that was mostly British or American. This weakened the original goal of the bill, which was to treat everyone equally in court.
Let's break down this text in the simplest way, step by step. What is rendition of Mysore? 1. What happened in 1831? The British government, led by Lord William Bentinck, took control of the state of Mysore. This action is called annexing, which means taking control of a territory. The British did this because they thought the ruler of Mysore was not managing the state well. They said there was misgovernment, which means the government was not doing a good job. 2. What happened later? Later, it was discovered that the reports about bad governance in Mysore were exaggerated. This means that things were not as bad as the British first thought. However, the British East India Company, the authority that ruled India for Britain, did not change their decision to control Mysore. What did Ripon do? 1. Ripon decided to correct the past mistake. In 1881, Lord Ripon, who was the British Viceroy of India at the time, decided to correct the wrong that had been done in 1831. He decided to give Mysore back to the ruler's adopted son. The old ruler, called the Raja, had died in 1866. His adopted son was made the new Maharaja, the ruler. 2. Conditions for returning Mysore. The instrument of transfer was a legal document. It laid out the conditions under which Mysore was returned to the Maharaja. This document showed that the relationship between the British, paramount power, and Indian rulers, princes, had changed. The British still had more power than the Indian rulers. Why did Ripon resign, leave his job? 1. What happened in Egypt? In 1882, the British Prime Minister, Gladstone, allowed British troops to take control of Egypt. A group of Indian soldiers was also sent to Egypt to help with this occupation, taking control. The cost of this war partly came from Indian money, the Indian exchequer, even though the war had nothing to do with India. Ripon was upset. Ripon strongly disagreed with using Indian money and Indian troops for Britain's war in Egypt. He saw this as very unfair to India. Why did Ripon feel like a failure? 1. The Ilbert Bill. The Ilbert Bill, which was supposed to create equality between Indian and British judges, faced a lot of opposition from the British community in India. The compromise weakened the original idea of the bill, which disappointed Ripon. He felt that he couldn't achieve his goal of making India more fair. Number 2. Ripon resigned. Because of the Ilbert Bill controversy and the unfair use of Indian resources for the British war in Egypt, Ripon felt like his efforts in India had failed. He resigned, left his job before his term ended, and returned to England feeling like a defeated man. Summary. In 1831, the British took control of Mysore because they believed the ruler was not managing it well. Later, they realized this was exaggerated, but didn't reverse the decision. In 1881, Ripon gave control of Mysore back to the adopted son of the former ruler, but the British still kept power over Indian princes. Ripon resigned because he was upset over the use of Indian resources for British wars and felt his mission to make India more equal had failed after the Ilbert Bill controversy. If you have any specific part you need more clarification on or an example to simplify further, just let me know. Let's simplify this text about Lord Ripon in the easiest way possible. Who was Lord Ripon? Lord Ripon was a British viceroy, top ruler of India from 1880 to 1884. Some people thought he was a great leader for India, while others believed he did things that could cause the British to lose control over India. What did people say about Ripon? 1. Florence Nightingale. She called Ripon the savior of India. She thought his rule was the start of a golden age for India, meaning a very good and bright time. 2. Arnold White. He believed Ripon's actions could lead to the British losing control of India. So he was against Ripon. 3. Indians' feelings. Many Indians loved Ripon and called him Ripon the Good and Virtuous. This means they saw him as a good and honest person. 4. He was an important leader in India. In 1909, during a speech, he said Ripon was the greatest and most beloved viceroy, British ruler, that India had ever seen. He said Ripon was loved by educated Indians like no other Englishman except 2 others, Alan Octavian Hume and Sir William Wedderburn. Why did Indians love Ripon? 1. Local self-government. Ripon introduced the idea of local self-government. This meant giving Indians more power to govern their own local areas. For example, it allowed native communities, Indian villages or towns, to do things like fix their own roads without needing British permission. 2. Equality between Indians and Europeans. Ripon tried to treat Indians and Europeans equally under the law. This was a big change because at that time, Europeans were often treated as superior, better than Indians. He was trying to end racial differences and make sure both Indian and European people were treated fairly. 3. Belief in justice. Ripon was known to be a just, fair person and a God-fearing man, someone who believed in doing the right thing. He wanted all people to have freedom and fair treatment, just like the British people enjoyed. What did Ripon do in 1909? In 1909, Ripon supported the Minto-Morley reforms. These reforms gave Indians more say in their government. He voted for this reform in the House of Lords, a part of the British government. He died the same year, in 1909. Challenges Ripon faced. 1. Bureaucracy defeated his ideas. Ripon's ideas, like local self-government, were blocked by the Indian bureaucracy, the group of British officials in India. These officials didn't want Indians to have too much power. 2. Limited success. While Ripon introduced great ideas, the changes were small. For example, even though local communities were allowed to fix roads, they could only do it if a British commissioner thought they were able to do it. This meant Ripon's efforts didn't bring big changes. Why? Ripon is not remembered for doing a lot of things, but for his good intentions. He tried to bring justice and equality. He believed in fairness for everyone, and he hated racial discrimination. Even though many of his ideas were unsuccessful, they gave hope to Indians. As Surendranath Banerjee, another Indian leader, said, Ripon is remembered for his pure intentions and his lofty ideals, high moral values. Summary. Lord Ripon was a British ruler in India who tried to bring equality and give Indians more power over their own local governments. He was loved by Indians because of his efforts to end racial differences and treat everyone fairly. Although many of his ideas didn't work out fully, Ripon is remembered for his good intentions and for inspiring the beginning of political life in India. If you need more examples or further explanation, feel free to ask.